So what happened here was after Anish played b4, I played bishop e6. I looked at the zoom cams, and those of you who are watching the match live will notice Anish basically put his hands and had this very bizarre look, like what's going on. Now I wasn't really sure what was happening, and Anish basically didn't move for the next 2 minutes, and I wasn't sure if he had made a mouse slip, like perhaps he had played knight g3, that was a mouse slip, or he had lost his connection. So in my olden age, rather to my chagrin, I went soft and offered Anish a draw. I'm going soft in my old age. Yeah, I'm going soft, I know. We are back again, and I'm going to give you some general thoughts on a match today that we played against Anish Giri. So today in the Speed Chess Championship, we played against Anish Giri. Very topsy-turvy match. Anish, very strong chess player. Obviously, 90 minutes of 5+1, 60 minutes of 3+1, and 30 minutes of 1+1. All right, so the first spot where we're going to take a critical moment is, I believe this was game number 6 or game number 7. At the point in this game, I was leading by 2 points. So I was doing very well, and we had this Italian that was played here. So let's go back to the start. So we had e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, castles, knight f6, d3, h6, c3, castles, rook e1, d6, and Anish plays knight d2, a5, knight f1. Now, what I will say about the Gucci piano, to be very clear, is that after knight e7, d4, bishop b6, knight g3, knight g6, h3, rook e8, white is perhaps a little bit better. Now, in some earlier games, I played it a little bit differently. I played the much more testing line here, which is bishop e6, bishop b5, knight e7, d4, bishop b6, knight g3. Now, in this position early in the match, I actually chose to play knight g6, which is not the best move here. As almost everybody knows, I played e takes d4. I had this position with knight d4, bishop d7 against Wesley So in the previous Speed Chess Championship, I believe last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago now. And I had in the Magnus Carlsen Tour this whole line with knight e4, bishop d3, and the line goes on and on forever. Again, I was not really in the mood to play heavy theory today. I also didn't want to show all my analysis, so I chose not to play the most testing lines, which is why I did get into quite a bit of trouble throughout the match. So anyway, let's get back to the game here. We got this position after rook e8, bishop d3, bishop d7, all very standard so far. Whoa, they need a mix for the 10 gifted subs with bishop e3, a4, b4, takes, rook a1, queen a1, c6. Now, as you'll see, white's maybe a little bit better here. His pieces are perhaps slightly more developed, but again, very symmetrical pawn structure here. No real weaknesses for either side. So here, queen c1 is played. I go bishop c1, bishop c7. Of course, not queen e7 first, because then white can take here, and there might be a problem with some tactics. So I go bishop c7, bishop c2, queen e7, knight f5, queen f8, knight g3, rook a8, b4, bishop e6. Now, the reason that we look at this game is not so much that the game ends in a draw here, but at this moment in the match, I was leading by 2 points. So what happened here was after Anish played b4, I played bishop e6. I looked at the zoom cams, and those of you who are watching the match live will notice Anish basically put his hands and had this very bizarre look, like what's going on. Now, I wasn't really sure what was happening, and Anish basically didn't move for the next 2 minutes. So I was in a very tough spot here where I had about 4 minutes on the clock. Anish had 2 minutes, and I wasn't sure if he had made a mouse slip, like perhaps he had played knight g3, that was a mouse slip, or he had lost his connection. And so in my olden age, and rather to my chagrin, I went soft and offered Anish a draw. I was up 2 minutes on the clock here, up 2 games in the match, but I felt like something had happened. I didn't know if it was his disconnection or a slip or what happened, so I offered him a draw rather than trying to just blow him off the board. And in retrospect, this was a big mistake, because after I'm going soft in my old age. Yeah, I'm going soft, I know. So after I offer this draw, Anish proceeded then to win the next 2 games in a row and even the match at 4.5 all. So he evens the match at 4.5, and this made it very tricky. I was able to win 2 games after that to go into the 3+1 section again with a 2-point lead, but not feeling very comfortable. So we're going to go to this next game, which is very critical. At this moment in the 3+1 portion, I was leading by 3 points, I believe, at the moment. And so we'll go through this following game. So I play knight f3, d5, g3, c5, bishop g2. Now, throughout the match, I was playing these knight f3, g3, bishop g2 setups, or knight f3, b3, knight f3, b3, bishop b2, and all that stuff. So I chose to play many of these hyper modern systems. Those of you guys who have watched a lot of my games know that I like to play it like that. So I go d4 here. Anish plays knight Anish plays knight to f6. I play b3 again, trying to create the fianchetto here with the two bishops on b2 and g2. We trade. e5 is played. I take on c6, and now I play bishop to b2 here. Anish goes bishop to b4. I play c3, bishop d6, c4, castles, bishop e6. Now this game was very, very critical for a couple of reasons. So we'll go through. So takes. I play knight to c3 here. Anish goes. Oh wait, is this the right game? Yeah, Anish plays d4. Play knight b5, bishop to d5 here, and I trade and go pawn to e3. Now right away at this position, I think that I'm quite a bit better. What happened to my light? Give me 1 second, guys. There you go, you guys. There's the light. The light is back. So there's the light. All right, so we have our light back. Okay, so I felt that I was doing very well here again. At this moment in the match, I was up, I believe, 3 points if I'm not mistaken. Very critical moment, and I'm up a pawn out of the opening here. So I thought it was much better if Anish trades the pawn. I just take, as you guys will see, I have 1 2 3 4 5. Black is 1 2 3 4, and it's very, very good for me. So Anish goes e4, and even though he's down a pawn here, he's a great knight, great outpost. The bishop is kind of behind this pawn, so it's really not that active in reality. And black has very nice ideas like f5, rook e8, f4, and so forth. So I play rook c1, f5, rook c5, trying to dislodge or perhaps target this knight on d5, especially since I have the pawn guarding the rook. So Anish plays f4. I go queen to h5. He plays rook a d8, and now I play queen to e5. The idea is that I basically want to trade the queens here. Again, my bishop is not great behind this pawn on d4, and additionally, black has ideas like e3, fg3, f3, and so forth. So I play queen to e5 here. Anish plays queen d7. Of course, he doesn't really want to trade, even though this might be okay for black. Black's down a pawn, and now without queens on the board, even if he goes f3, there really are no mating threats here. So this should be very, very good for white. So in this position after queen e5, Anish trades the queens on e5, and now I take back with the pawn. Anish plays queen d7, and now I play queen takes e4 here. Anish goes f3, and in this position, I start making some mistakes. First of all, I play king to h1. Now, oddly enough, this holds, but barely. Initially, I thought that after queen h3, rook g1, knight f6, queen h4, there would be a very nasty idea here with knight to g4, leading to a forced checkmate, because obviously I can't move the rook here because then I get checkmated. And if I take the queen, black just takes the pawn with a checkmate here. So I was very worried at first, but fortunately, I was able to realize that if this happens after knight to g4, as a very nice move, rook to c2, guarding the checkmate, and if queen h2, I just take, and I'm ahead by a piece. And black cannot take the pawn, so black would have to trade the queens. And now you'll notice that white has 1 2 3 4 5 6, and black has 1 2 3 4. So white's ahead by 2 pawns and is completely winning. So Anish plays king h8 here, basically with a completely different idea. I think Anish at this point, he wanted to play rook de8. The problem is after takes, this is a check, and now he has a trade. So when Anish plays king to h8, he has a new idea in mind, which is, let's just say I play a move like a4. I believe now he can play rook d to e8. So I take the knight. He has a very nasty checkmate, queen h3. Rook guards the pawn, and he's threatening checkmate on g2 here. Rook to g1, and now black can play the very nasty move, rook to e1. And I can no longer take the rooks of checkmate. And black's threatening just mate in one. Like if I move the rook, for example, there's queen g2, checkmate, pawn guards the queen, and the white king is stuck in the corner here. And if I try like queen f3, which is one other try, black can trade the rooks and take the queen. And there's no ice skater here with rook c8 because black can simply capture my rook on c8. So instead in the game, I realized that this is the idea. I play rook g1, so now if rook d8 takes queen h3, I can just go like queen h5, no checkmate, and I'm completely winning. I'm up a bishop here. So Anish plays knight to f6. I play queen to h4. And here Anish plays knight to g4, which is a big mistake, by the way. Apparently, he did have rook to e8. And I was actually quite worried about this move because there are ideas like knight g4 and knight e4. And if the rook even gets to e2, it's really, really bad. So Anish plays knight g4 here, which I knew was a mistake, by the way, during the game. I felt it was wrong. I play rook f1. And he goes rook f6. And this was the critical moment where I had plenty of time on my clock, but I decided to pull a netbo. So when he played rook f6, in the split second that Anish thought and played rook f6, I saw that I had rook h5 and I'm probably doing well. But for some reason, I sort of hallucinated. I thought that after bishop e1 stopping rook h6, there was simply no tactic here. I thought after bishop c1, I saw this of queen d4. I think I thought that I had rook c4, or I had some trick like rook f5. I don't know exactly what I saw. But for some reason, I thought that I could do this. And so I was really upset because when I played bishop c1 and Anish took on d4, I basically have to resign here. because in essence my rook is under attack on c5. The pawn at f2 is also under attack, and there's not really a whole lot I can do here. So I tried bishop e3, hoping for a trick, hoping that Anish will take the bishop, because after queen d4, rook d4, now I have a classic ice skater. The king is stuck on the back rank, cannot come up, and of course it will be a forced checkmate here after rook d8 and rook f8. Unfortunately for me, of course, Anish, very strong player. After bishop e3, he finds a very nice tactic with knight takes f2. I cannot take with the rook here, because after queen d1 check, I have to block. Queen f1, bishop g1, there's queen g2 checkmate. So in this position I take, and Anish plays a very nice move, queen takes f2, and here I played queen f3 and then resigned in view of the fact that he can take the rook. Again, I cannot take the queen here because of rook d1 checkmate. If I try rook g1 to stop the checkmate on g2, there are many ways for black to win, but the cleanest is just to play queen g1, king g1, f2, king f1, and then rook d1, and after king g2, black makes a queen checkmate here. So this was very upsetting to me, because I realized as soon as I played this, I realized if I had played rook h5 right away, the microphone should not be scuffed, you guys. I realized that if I played rook to h5, I would have won this game. So I was very, very upset at the time, because I knew that if I won that game, I would have won the entire match right there. So I was very, very upset. But again, in these Speed Chess Championship matches, it's very important that you keep your composure and you try to play to your strengths. Now, what I knew is that I just had to keep it solid. So after a couple of draws, we'll go to the next game, where once again I was up by 2 points, and I felt like after I won this game, the match really started to turn my way. So I played e4, Anish plays c5, plays c3, knight f6. Now again, I played the Alpin against Anish. As I said before, I did not have time to do a lot of preparation before the match. I wanted to avoid big theoretical battles with Anish, so I just tried to play chess. So I played the Alpin. We got this position after knight f3, d6. I played d4. He trades here on d4, and now he goes e6. I take the pawn on d6. Black cannot capture with the bishop here, because then you would lose the pawn on g7. So he goes knight c6, and now I play bishop b5. Someone in chat asked me, you were bursting out laughing plenty of the time. What kind of composure is that? Well, you guys, it is the Speed Chess Championship, and you gotta have some fun. You gotta show your emotion. But more than that, I felt like there were too many games that were ending in draws. So bishop b5 is played. Anish goes bishop d7. We trade here, and now I castle. Here Anish plays queen takes d6. Again, there's no bishop d6 because g7 hangs. I play rook d1, and this next move by Anish is a big blunder. He castles here, and when Anish castled, he shook his head very violently. I could see it on the Zoom call that he was very upset, because after queen a7, it feels like what black has just hung a pawn. However, sort of similar to the whole vein of the match, Anish has queen c5 here, and after this move, it's very tricky for white, because I really would love to keep queens on the board like queen a8, but after king c7, queen a3, I believe that here black can just trade the queens, and after takes knight c3, black is definitely better. So as we get back to this position after queen c5, I have to trade the queens, and now even though I'm up a pawn, black has the double bishops, or he has the bishop pair here, as we say in chess, and it feels very problematic. So here I play rook e1, b5. Now I'm not going to go through this game super in depth. I play knight e5, bishop e8, knight e2, but I did win this game. And after bishop a7, I play knight f3, knight d4, and he takes on c1. He goes rook d5. Now white again still up a pawn here. I have 6 pawns. Black has 5 pawns here, so it is an extra pawn, but still with the double ops long term, maybe you can create a center and activate the bishops. So I play knight f3 to stop this e5 push, making sure that black cannot win the knight or the rook with this pin towards the g1 square. King b7, I play rook e2, sidestep this pin. Anish goes g5. Now I play knight c2, g4, knight d4. Anish plays h5, and I go rook c1. Idea again, stop the center where black can play f6, e5. For example, if black can get a setup like this, for example, this bishop on a7 is really, really good because the diagonal is open here, and I can't put anything in the way because the pawns support each other and they cover this d4 square. So that's why here I play rook e1, stop this e5 move, try to keep this diagonal shut so the bishop on a7 is far less effective. So he plays h4. I go rook e5 here. Anish plays rook takes rook. I take with the rook here. Plays bishop b6. Again, trying to go bishop c7 and e5, trying to open up some diagonals, and it's still not so easy for white to win. So here I play knight b5. bishop b5, rook takes b5, and now Anish finds rook d8. Now, oddly enough, this is a big mistake. During the game, I was very concerned about this very dirty little tactic, which I'm going to show you guys, which is that after g3, let's say I trade, I cannot take back because there's a pin. And let's say I play a move like knight d4. Looks like a nice, good move, but there's a very, very dirty tactic with rook to h1 check, king takes rook, g takes f2. And now I can no longer stop the pawn from becoming a queen, and I would have to resign the game. However, however, after g3, I can play knight e3, which was my intention, and computer says I'm full of it, because after rook d8, apparently, I'm not even better. I guess I have to take, go king f1, but there's gf2, and it's not very, very special here. So, clearly my calculations were off, but Anish played rook d8 instead, which was a mistake, because now instead of actually playing a good move, I play knight d4. Apparently, after king f1, I just win the game, because if rook d2, I have knight e3, king a6 that takes, knight c4, and I'm an idiot. Okay, plain and simple. Very, very poor. Very, very poor chess. So as you guys see, I was not playing great chess. I play knight d4 instead, forcing a rook and pawn endgame. Anish goes king a6. I played rook h5. He trades here, which is kind of the final nail in the coffin. After a move like g3, it's probably still better for white after hg3, hg3, fg3, but it's... Oh, wait, no, fg3 is bad. Oh, very nice. This is, by the way, here's another example of why computers are so good. If I go fg3, there's e5, pinning the knight, and after rook e5, there's rook takes d4. Because if I take, there's bishop d4, creating a very nice wooden shield here, and black, I guess it's only a draw with perfect play, but black cannot lose anymore. So instead, Anish trades, and after takes, rook d4, king f1. This leads to a rook and pawn endgame. After rook d1, king e2, rook b1. And after rook h4, rook b2, king e3. It's simply winning because even though I'm only going to be up one pawn here, I have an outside h pawn here that is just going all the way up the board. So because I have an outside pawn that's going all the way up the board, this is very simply winning for white. He goes king b6. I play rook g7. Again, trying to show good technique here, because now if black pushes the pawn, for example, I have rook g6, and I grab the pawn on e6 here, and I win the game. So instead, Anish plays rook to a7 here, and I go h4. Again, very simply trying to force this h pawn up the board and win the game. Additionally, I'm attacking the pawn on f7 here. So Anish goes king c6. I play h5, king to d6, and now I go h6. Very simple idea that if black goes king e7, I go h7, and after rook a8, I play rook to g8, and again, pawn supports the rook, and I push the pawn to h8, and that's the end of the game. And if black tries to move the rook away, for example, like rook a8, I just take the pawn, and after rook h8, h7, this is just very simply winning. I'm going to push the g pawn all the way up the board now. So here, Anish tries rook a3 check. I go king f4, rook to a4, or rook a2, sorry, king e2, rook a2, king f3, rook a3. I go king g4, rook a4, king to g3, and after rook a3, f3, Anish resigns here. In view of the fact that, again, if he moves the rook back to a8, I just take the pawn, and I have two extra pawns here. And if he goes king e7, again, I have h7, rook a8, g8. Now, this victory is very important because when I won this game, this gave me a 3-point cushion. And I felt that if I was ahead by about 3 to 4 points, there really was no coming back for Anish. And so it was really critical that after that very bad game that you guys saw before with queen takes d4, queen f2, that I played a good game and solidified the lead back at +3 instead of being +2. All right, so the last game that we're going to take a look at from my match against Anish today was this game. I think it was 2 games or 3 games later. Again, I had a 3-point advantage at this moment, and I'd been playing all these E5 Italians, the Gucci piano, and I decided, you know what, I felt that because I was up by 3 points here, it was time to kind of open it up a little bit more, take some bigger risks now that I had built an advantage versus trying to be super solid. So in this game, I chose to play the Caro-Kann. I play e4 c6, d4 d5. Anish plays e5. I go bishop f5, knight f3 e6. Now this is of course the classical variation of the Caro-Kann advance. White generally tries to play for quick development, maybe c4 knight d2, maybe bishop e2 or bishop d3. A lot of options for white, but the main argument is that by playing with this chain of d4 and e5, white has more space in the center of the board. So Anish plays bishop e2, I play knight e7, c3, knight to d7 here. He castles, and I play h6. Logical move, by the way, for a few reasons. First of all, when you play h6, you have the idea to play g5 potentially. You also have the idea to go bishop h7. So a lot of openings where you get a bishop outside the chain like this, there are options for white to play a move like knight h4 potentially. So that's why I play h6. Additionally, there is a line here, I believe, with knight h4, bishop e4, knight d2. And I believe the move here is c5. I will not delve in depth into this whole variation, but I do remember the first time that I looked at this variation with knight h4, bishop e4, knight d2, and that was in 2009 when I was doing preparation before a game that I played against Peter Savidler in the tournament in San Sebastian. Of course, you guys, I did win that tournament, so that's why this game, or this preparation and this game and all this stuff sticks in my memory. So let's move back to the game. So after knight d7, Anish castles. Now I play h6 here. Anish plays a4. Now there are many setups for white here. a4 is one way. White can also play like knight d2 and c4. He can also play like b3 c4. He can also go a4. So many different setups. Additionally, there's a setup maybe knight e1 f4 and bishop d3, but again, I'm not going to delve into all these lines because it's not a course for chessable. All right, you guys, so after h6, a4 is played by Anish here. I go queen c7. Anish plays b4, and now I decide that, you know what, Anish is really trying to fling his pawns, create the flying V formation here. He's trying to over push his pawns. You know what, if he wants to have that kind of a game, I'm not going to try to castle my king to the king side. I'm going to be a man. I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to attack him here by playing g5 with the idea of maybe playing knight g6 and f6, or maybe playing even g4, h5, h4, but trying to take some space on the king side and castle my king long. So here, knight bd2 is played by Anish. I play knight g6. Now, you do have to be careful about in which position do you go bishop g6, knight f5, or which position do you keep the bishop on f5 and play knight g6. What I would say is that it's very important that the one time that you have to be careful of putting the knight on g6 is if white, for example, has a situation like this where you can play g4. Let's just say you go bishop g7, g4, that your bishop doesn't get trapped. Because after bishop e4, f3, your bishop has no squares along this diagonal. It's going to get captured no matter where it goes. So you have to be very, very careful. And the orders are important. But when white puts a knight on d2 here, for example, and you go knight g6 and there's no g4, generally it's always okay. But here, let's say white plays knight e1 to threaten g4. Now you have the very important move knight to f4, supported by the pawns on h6 and g5. And now you can always retreat with the bishop in the next couple of moves. So when you're playing the Caro-Kann, you play these h6, g5 setups. You need to be careful when you put the bishop on g6 or knight on g6. Generally, if white has a move like g4, you should put the bishop on g6 and play for knight f5. But when white is not actually threatening to play g4, you can just get away with knight g6 here. So here, knight b3 is played by Anish. Now I play f6, trying to play it like a French and chip the structure. Again, when you look at the space that white has taken with all these pawns in the center, you'll notice the bishop on f8 is a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah, I can put it on g7 here, but again, it's just staring at a pawn wall. And if I go to e7, it's not really aiming anywhere. Again, b4 is guarded by the pawn. All these squares are super restricted here, and I don't really have scope on this diagonal either towards h4. So I decide, you know what, let's chop the center here with f6. Basically, the reason being that I'm threatening to win a pawn here. I'm attacking it 1, 2, 3, and 4, and white is guarding with 1 and 2. So now, after Anish takes on f6 and I take back, you'll notice that my bishop has a much nicer square it can go to. The bishop can go to d6 and target h2, and then I can even follow up bishop d6 with g4 to undermine the knight on f3. So the bishop on d6 is really, really well placed. So after knight f6, Anish plays knight c5, basically trying to put pressure on the pawn here on e6. Even though it's guarded, that's his idea. So now I play b6 here, attacking the knight. Goes knight a6, kind of going to the rim. Now, during the game, I knew that b6 was not the best move, but I kind of figured, you know what, I'm up by 3. Let's try to keep it going. Let's try to mix it up. And I figured that I would be able to outplay Anish in the complications. So here Anish plays knight a6, and I play queen c8. Now, during the game, there were many moves I looked at. I looked at queen b7, queen d7, even queen g7. I actually did consider it. Oddly enough, queen g7 is the best move according to the computer. So I thought for a while, and I figured, well, okay, if I go to d7, I'm not targeting the knight. So why do I put my queen here when white can play like knight e5 or b5 even, and it feels really, really bad? Whereas here, I should go queen c8 to attack the knight on a6 and always keep white distracted. So after I play queen to c8 here, He plays knight to e5. Now I take on e5 and I go knight e4. Now again, you'll notice that my king is a little bit iffy. I've not developed on the king side here the bishop and the rook, or the king. But at the same time, white's knight is on the rim, it's on the edge of the board, and it's not really doing a whole lot here. So Anish plays queen to e1 here, which I think is kind of the start of going the wrong direction. Now the one thing I would say in this match, and I actually felt this very early on in the match, and I forgot to go over the game that we drew. I think it was maybe the second or third game of the match, but Anish was always a little bit hesitant. He never was really going for the kill, and I felt like he was trying to play good moves, but he wasn't trying to move that just like is the hammer. He wasn't playing the hammer move. So because of that, I think that was one of the big issues that Anish had throughout the match, was that he was always trying to play good moves, but he wasn't going for the kill. So after knight e4, he plays queen e1, and now I go g4. Important, by the way, that I don't get my own knight trapped. The knight here on e4 looks really good, but for example, the queen guards. Unless I play a move like bishop e7, after f3, you'll notice that the knight is trapped. My horsey cannot move. All the L shapes don't work out for me here. Everything is trapped. G3 hangs, f2 hangs, d2 hangs, c3 hangs, c5 hangs, d6 hangs, f6 hangs. So basically, I'm going to lose no matter where I go with the horsey here. So for that reason, I do have to be careful, and that's why I played g4 here. Again, if f3 I can take, I also create space for the knight, but additionally, I now start to push the pawns up the board. And the third very important factor is that after I go g4, I stop this nasty idea of bishop h5 check. So A, create the square for the knight. B, take more space on the king side. C, stop this bishop h5 check. So it's a triple purpose move here. So g4, a5 is played. And this is actually the big mistake by Anish. This I think was the move that officially ended the match for Anish, because after a5 I have this move b5. Now of course people generally ask, are we looking at the cams during matches? Now during the Magnus tournaments, generally I don't look at the cams, because those events are rapid chess, they're much slower. You don't want to lose time looking for a fake reaction potentially. So in the SEC, however, where it's a blitz situation, players are going to have reactions on the fly, because you have to react in the moment. And I remember when Anish played a5 and I went b5, Anish's face, his jaw dropped here, and Anish was very unhappy, because after b5 he like self traps his own knight on the rim, because by playing a5 b5 now he closes the diagonal for the bishop, and now he has to go knight c5. And after I trade and take, I'm simply up a pawn. I have great ops here, and I'm much better. So I'll just show you guys the rest of the game for posterity, but after this point, it's really tough to play. Anish plays king h1. I go queen c7 here, targeting the pawn at e5. Plays bishop f4. I castle here. Anish plays a6, again kind of trying to prevent me from playing a6 myself, because let's just say white goes queen d1 a6. You'll notice that white can't really attack my king. Even though my pawns are pushed, they control all the critical squares here, so the pawns just prevent white from ever creating any open files or any attack on the queen side. So Anish plays a6 here, I think just hoping maybe there's some rook b1, maybe some sacrifice at some point. I play rook df8, trying to maybe fossilize the bishop on f4, some kind of bishop move potentially. Plays queen d2. Now I go h5 here. Anish plays bishop to e3, and now I play queen b6, which is a horrible move. Those of you guys who are watching the match live will notice that at this point I started shaking my head after Anish's next move. So after he goes bishop d4, you'll notice that I've kind of stuck the bishop on c5. I can't ever move my queen, because then I'll hang the bishop. But if I ever trade, now white actually has an open file, and there are a lot of weaknesses in the position here for the black king. So after bishop d4, I started shaking my head very violently, because I was very mad at myself, because I knew that now Anish was going to get some kind of counterplay. Fortunately, I kept my wits about me to some degree, and I play h4 here, trying to attack on the king side. Anish plays queen e3. I trade the bishops on d4, and now I go b4. Now this is a very committal move. Again, the problem for me here is that even though the king looks very safe, white is very quickly going to line up the rooks on the c file, and there's going to be massive pressure towards the king on c8, and it's going to be very hard to play. So I go b4 because I see that white cannot win this pawn readily, and additionally I figure, you know what, I always have the idea to distract him on the king side, so maybe I can also start distracting him on the queen side as well. So Anish plays bishop d1, and now I go g3. Again, he tries to stop me from pushing, but now I start going after him on the other side of the board. So this is where you start playing on both sides of the board. It's called distraction. I go that way, and then I go that way. So I keep going both ways and going after Anish on both sides of the board. So Anish plays bishop a4 here, and now I play the very thematic move h3. Now, one thing you'll notice in a lot of openings, Sicilian specifically, if you ever get a structure where you have pawns in the Sicilian on h5 and g6, I'll give you guys one example. So let me go back to start just to show off. Let's say e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4 takes. Let's say knight f6, knight c3, e6, g4, bishop e7, g5, knight d7. White goes h4, castles, bishop e3, a6, queen d2. Let's just say knight c6, white castles, you go queen c7, knight b3, b5, h5, bishop b7, g6. Very normal position, comes out of many Sicilians. White can get the same structure, pawns on h5 and g6 versus h7, g7, f7. Now, let's just say black plays a move like knight f6, for example. Generally here, white can even play a move like h6, potentially to try and smash the structure. Now, again, as I said before, this is why you need to play many different openings. You need to understand pawn structures, because this is a completely different opening, but the theme is still there of the 3 versus 2 here on the king side. And if black plays a move like rook d8, again, h6 can be very, very strong here for white, which is why normally when you get this situation, if you can, you want to trade pawns and go here and lock the structure. Now, in this case, it doesn't work because white can very simply take and get a quick checkmate here. So again, keep this in mind. And vice versa, by the way. Let's say we go back here. Let's get a different position now. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the board. Let's get this position. You'll notice that now we have the same structure here, the 3 versus 2 on the queen side. Now, in this situation, if you can, normally what you want to do is you want to take once and play a3. And again, you create the structure, this chain, and it's just a closed file here, so you can't really attack if you're black. So again, this is why themes are really, really important, because you need to understand pawn structures, and it can come out of any number of different openings. So let's go back. All right, so in this game, where were we? In this game, as we go down, right, so where were we? Right, so we were in this position. I play this move g3 here. Now you'll notice, again, we have the same structure of the 3 versus 2, except I'm black. But in this case, it's not quite the same, because after takes and a move like h3, you'll notice that, again, there's some tricks. I think bishop h3 might be playable, but even rook g8 with the idea of taking in g2 is really, really dangerous. Whereas if white could magically put the bishop on f1, his king would be very, very safe here, because he could always just go king g1 and the pawns are defended. But in this case, after g3, it's not quite there. So Anish plays bishop a4, and now I play the very thematic pawn to h3 here to basically blast the structure. And now it's just completely lost for a few reasons. First of all, if white doesn't take the pawn, let's just say white plays a move like rook c1, I have a very fancy schmancy checkmate idea with bishop e4 here. And after rook takes c6, I can take, and I go pawn takes pawn check, king g1, pawn takes h2, and this is checkmate because both the pawns are guarded and the king cannot go anywhere here. So back to this position, Anish cannot really just wait, because again, the whole king side collapses. And after he takes the pawn on g3, regardless of how he captures, I guess he could capture with the queen. If he captures with the queen, I can go rook g8. And again, big problems here for Anish. I'm threatening to take the pawn and fork the king and the rook. His queen is in the line of fire, and it's game over. And so Anish takes back this way. Now, he could have taken with the other pawn, but he has the same problem. I take, I create the fork here, king g2, and now I have bishop h3, creating the skewer and winning this rook on f1. So here Anish takes with the h pawn. I take back on g2. He takes. I create the skewer. He goes king g1. I take the rook. He takes back with the rook. I go queen takes a6, creating an attack on the bishop on a4. And here Anish could have tried rook a1 to keep the game going, but after rook a1, rook h7, I just create the double stack, and it should be a pretty clean win. Anish plays bishop takes c6, hoping that I will take the bishop, after which point he can play rook c1 and win my queen. But here, I do not do that. Instead, I find the very nice tactical move, rook to h1 check, attacking the king, and removing the king from defending the rook on f1. And after king takes h1, queen f1, Anish resigns here in view of king h2, rook to h8 check. King has no squares here on the g file, only move is queen h6. And after I play rook takes h6, it's just checkmate, game over, and that's all she wrote. So with this win, I moved ahead in the match by 4 points or 5 points. I'm not 100% sure the exact score, but when I won this game, it really, I think, opened the floodgates. And after this, the match was never really in doubt. Now I will say, just to recap a little bit more about the bullet portion, the bullet was not fantastic for me. I think I won that portion maybe like 4-3, or maybe it was 5-3. There were a lot of draws in bullet. Now again, what I would say about that is that more than me like trying, it was very hard knowing that I had the match won already to really take it seriously. And so I was kind of coasting, which is a large part of why I think in bullet portion it was not a big differential. So I will add that. But again, if the match had been closer, you better believe that I would have brought it a little bit more.